Okay, so welcome back. We're about to start session 3, and I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Thomas Jones. Over to you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thanks again, Lynn, and welcome back, everyone, for the final session. The last, but by no means the least session for the day. And I'm delighted to welcome my wonderful panelists for this evening's session. You can see them on the screen. They are Priya Mahajan, who's the head of Asia Public Policy and Regulatory Council at Verizon. Esther Pay, the lead for international, external and regulatory affairs for APAC at AT&T Warner Media. Dr. Pascal Dutroux, the legal unit manager at the CRA in Qatar. And Yuni Zhong, a senior digital technology specialist at the ADB. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's session. I thought we'd just start by asking each of you to talk a little bit about the things that are important to you when we talk about tech and sustainability. And we've heard a lot about things this evening on 5G and regulation, but tonight's topic is, of course, tech and sustainability. And I'd perhaps like to start with you, Priya, and ask you from the perspective of a big global telco like Verizon, what do you see are the key issues for sustainability in tech in Asia? And in particular, how do you see, as a global operator, some of the new developments and policy settings in Europe being transitioned across to the Asian region?
Thank you so much, Thomas. And indeed, it's great to be here today. Are you able to hear me?
We are indeed, loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you to IIC for the opportunity to be on this panel. It's indeed my pleasure. I am Priya Mahajan. I am responsible for public policy and government affairs for Asia Pacific region at Verizon, and in my role I work with policymakers, regulators and stakeholders across this region on tech policy issues. And the theme of today's session is both timely and pertinent. I think it's very close to my heart, as we can all kind of agree to one thing, that protecting our planet is really vital, as we see that the climate change can have larger effects on us human beings and the environment as well. And as a result of that, as Thomas alluded, we see policymakers having increasing focus on how those policy interventions can help accelerate some of the commitments being expected from the industry in terms of technology, in terms of resources to help protect the planet for future generations. So, and the issue has actually caught further attention after the just concluded COP26 conference, which is the United Nations Climate Change Conference. So what I will be exploring in the next 10 minutes is basically 3 areas. One, what does tech and sustainability mean for the 4 key stakeholders, which is the businesses, the consumers, the government and the society. Number 2, what are some of the recent policy and regulatory initiatives on sustainability? And then after we've looked at the policy changes or policy interventions, we'll then look at the key initiatives from the industry angle, and there I would kind of share a few highlights from how Verizon has been working in this direction, addressing the challenge of climate change and sustainability. So let me begin with the first aspect, which is what does it mean to us? When we talk about sustainability and tech, to me, we are essentially talking about 2 things. Firstly, the enabling role that technology can play in this world and really changing the way we live with things like 5G and IoT. And the other aspect is about the whole ecosystem moving towards a situation where the business success demands a strong sustainability program. And to me, in that sense, sustainability is not about helping ourselves, but it's a business imperative in general, and customers are putting demands to support them in this regard as well. So that's how we see and I see sustainability. We spoke about some of the recent policy developments across the world, but the European Union seems to have taken the lead in translating its political objectives into regulations, and we might see policymakers in other regions, including the Asia Pacific region, pushing in the same direction. So it would be really important and interesting, I think, to see how international frameworks evolve and are implemented not only in the EU but globally. And from a policy angle, what we really need is an international dialogue and a cooperation on translating these sustainability policy objectives into reality. And so these dialogues are not only necessarily important between policymakers and regulators, but also between the policymakers and the industry and the citizens to basically share insights and best practices. As I said, I'll focus more on the developments that we are seeing in the EU, which I think is perhaps the first region to announce a comprehensive policy initiative under their Green Deal, the European Green Deal. So this is basically the European Commission's aim of making European Union climate neutral by 2050. And the plan is to review each existing law today on its climate merits and then introduce new legislations where there are gaps identified. And they build on renovation, biodiversity, and corporate governance and innovation. And what is really important here is that these initiatives build on the existing European sustainability related legislation and leadership. And as a matter of fact, the president of the European Commission has actually stated that this Green Deal would be Europe's man on the moon moment. So that's how important this issue is from a European Union perspective. And in order to meet the climate neutral target and the greenhouse emission levels, Europe has also introduced something which they call Fit for 2055. So this is basically an intermediate step towards climate neutrality. So the EU has raised its 2030 climate ambition, committing to cutting the emission by about 55% by 2030, comparing to the 1990 levels. And it includes a sets of revision to the climate, energy, and transport related legislations, and the new initiatives, for example, related to energy taxation and emissions. So as you can see, I mean, Europe is really ahead in terms of meeting their climate neutral targets. And what we see that there may be a policy transfer as other policymakers in the region, including in the Asia Pacific region, may be pushing in the same direction. We know that at a national level, Singapore has a 2030 green plan, although it hasn't set a formal target date for achieving the net zero emissions, but it aims to have half emissions from an expected 2030 peak. So I think from an industry point of view, the key here is engaging with the industry in a multi-stakeholder model to share insights to tackle these challenges, which are essentially based on a very sound policy framework and sharing insights both from industry and the government perspective. So let me now that we've looked at some of the key policy developments, let me now talk about how Verizon is as a technology leader is addressing and what efforts Verizon is making in tackling the climate change. As you know, we offer voice video data services on our networks and platforms. We delivered really reliable connectivity to our customers, and we have over 130,000 employees over the globe, and we serve not only consumers but also businesses and the government customers. But what is unique about our international presence is that outside of the US, we only provide services to businesses and government customers in about 150 countries. And when we talk about 5G and we talk about ushering in the fourth industrial revolution, we are also focusing more on environment sustainability, our social responsibility, and our commitments have actually accelerated in that regard as we move forward to create the networks to kind of provide some of these services. And moving forward, sustainability for Verizon really means that focus is on an inclusive recovery, which lifts our communities to a level that exceeds the pre-pandemic levels. And we believe that this is really an important moment for the businesses to take an action on climate change. And that is why we are taking really broad climate actions on our path to becoming a net zero in our operations by 2035. So I'll just talk about really at a very high level two primary global sustainability commitments that we have. The first one is about renewable energy commitment. So we made a commitment that we will source or generate renewable energy equivalent to 50% of our annual electricity consumption by 2025, and the other commitment that we have made is about achieving operational net zero emissions by 2035. So we are a very strong supporter of some of the international sustainability and climate change initiatives, including the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the European Union's Green Deal that I just kind of shared with you guys. In terms of our specific commitments and efforts, we've joined the Climate Pledge, which is co-founded by Amazon and the Global Optimism to meet the Paris Agreement. So that's our way of kind of really contributing to the pledge. We've also joined the World Economic Forum Trillion Trees platform, which is our pledge to double our current goal of planting 10 million trees by 2030. And then most importantly, we are engaged with this global organization of ICT companies, which is really focused on integrating social and environment sustainability into our sector, which is called Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative, in short, GESI. And our Chief Sustainability Officer is actually currently serving as a chairperson on the board of GESI. So these are some of the very, very important and high-level initiatives that Verizon has taken in this regard, in addition to several others, including on renewable energy and recycling. And all of these initiatives are driven by our sustainability team at Verizon, which really manages the network of employees across the globe, including the Verizon Green Team. It's a group of employee volunteers worldwide who support our initiatives and events through our programs. And just like in terms of how technology can power some of these societal challenges, I see the role of ICT companies to be very, very important here. First, as a technology company, how can we make sure that we improve our network efficiency, energy efficiency? Because for Verizon, 95% of our emissions come from the electricity we use to power our network. So maximizing the energy efficiency is really one of our critical priorities for us. So we are driving these efficiency in our networks through a variety of interventions, including auditing the temperature at our facilities so that the cooling systems can be decreased, replacing and upgrading older cooling systems, and also deploying some of the smart technologies at our facilities to optimize the equipments and the demands. So these interventions really reduce our overall site energy usage, as well as expectancy of our equipments as well. And in fact, we are proud that in recognition of our efforts, Verizon was ranked at number 9 in a recently published Barron's 100 Most Sustainable Companies report. So that's really a proof of how far Verizon has gone in meeting its commitments. I'll conclude by just quickly sharing how we are helping our customers reduce their carbon footprint. So according to a report I was reading, it is expected by 2030 digital technologies are expected to deliver reduction in the carbon emission by nearly 7 times the size of the growth of ICT sector. So that's really the power that ICT companies can play in reducing the carbon footprint of not only their own network, but also the companies that they support. So what we do at Verizon is we partner with nonprofits, and these nonprofits really measure the yearly CO2 commitments, emissions that our customers have avoided using our products and services. So it's really interesting to see that in 2020 we met our 2022 goal of networks and connected solution and saved more than double the amount of emissions our operations could create. So as we are progressing towards our climate goals, we are also making sure that how we can help our customers enable greater reductions in their own network and reduce their own carbon footprint. So with that, maybe I'll hand it back to you, Thomas, and see if you have any questions.
No, look, that's great, Priya. We might come back with some questions after we've heard from the other panelists. But I mean, it's very clear to me that Verizon, is a company that sets by example in terms of its approach to sustainability. It's very globally integrated in that way, and it's obviously got a huge commitment towards sustainability as an organization, as you say, and to help its customers achieve those goals. So it's fantastic to hear that from an operator. Esther, coming also from another very big global telco, AT&T, and also Warner Media. And I think Esther's going to talk a little bit about some of your collaboration with the US Department of Energy, and also I think perhaps comment a bit about how legacy regulation could be impeding some of the use of tech to achieve these sustainability goals. Esther.
Thanks very much, Thomas. It's my privilege to be amongst the IIC's lineup this year, and also my privilege to be amongst an esteemed panel and audience today. Yes, my name is Esther Pei. I'm from AT&T Warner Media. I have responsibility for external regulatory affairs here in the Asia Pacific region, and I'm based in Singapore. I think really just picking up on how Priya had started, right? She did mention, and that it's very, very true. Climate change is indeed that pressing challenge, and it poses a significant risk to people, to communities, the planet, as well as global commerce. And I think what we see is it's really shifting the way in which companies do business. And at AT&T Warner Media, we are in the business of connecting people and connecting diverse and talented storytellers to global audiences all around the world. And our values reflect our commitment to act to address climate change, because it's good for the communities that we serve, good for each of us, as well as it's good for our planet. And we believe that given the scale and urgency of climate change, all of us, and that includes companies, have a critical role to play. And I think I'll spend the next couple of minutes talking through some of our commitments in action. And we're doing this through a number of ways to address climate change. First of all, it is through our actions towards becoming net zero across our entire global operations by 2035. And we're doing that by focusing on several key initiatives, such as transitioning to a low emissions fleet, accelerating energy efficiency and network optimization efforts, as well as supporting the renewable energy marketplace. So this is our commitment to reduce our own emissions, but we're not stopping there. We are also delivering solutions that can help our enterprise customers achieve their net zero, as well as other sustainability goals. And that brings me really to our second commitment in action point, which is this is through our actions to support the net zero economy. So broadband connectivity, and that includes 5G as well as edge computing, as well as improving network efficiency, that can really help businesses reduce emissions, as well as strengthen their long-term outlook and reach their climate goals. So faster and more efficient networks can help enable companies to adopt emission reduction solutions by allowing them to do a couple of things. For example, monitor equipment and infrastructure, as well as better manage resources like electricity, fuel, water, as well as raw materials. So for example, the AT&T Multi-Access Edge Computing, or MEC for short, this is an on-premise edge solution that uses 5G, and it brings about capabilities like AI, augmented reality, machine learning, video monitoring, as well as predictive analytics to the office or to the factory. And what this does is that it does help uncover inefficiencies that will enable equipment to run more optimally, as well as reduce emissions. And I'll also turn now to looking at how we improve network efficiency. Business networks can be very complex, very capital intensive, as well as having a lot of hidden energy use. So through software-defined networking, as well as network function virtualization technologies, we help companies to use new technologies to eliminate the need to purchase, run, and maintain stacks of specialized energy-intensive network equipment. And by deploying an infrastructure solution, such as AT&T FlexWare, businesses can virtualize the functions of multiple single-purpose network devices on just one single low-cost, energy-efficient device, or even in the cloud. And we are so pleased to be recognized by the International Data Corporation in August last year as a leader in SD-WAN managed services in Asia Pacific. I did also want to highlight a very exciting announcement that we made in August last year, which is our goal to deliver solutions that help enable our customers to collectively reduce a gigaton of emissions by 2035. And we're doing this through what we call a Connected Climate Initiative, or CCI for short. I do want to touch on a third point, which is through our actions to build climate resilience. And here we have engaged the US Department of Energy, the National Laboratory, to help assess the risks of climate change to our business. So for example, through our climate change analysis tool, we are able to visualize just how climate change will affect our network as well as our operations at the neighborhood level all the way to 30 years into the future. And this is in contrast to, for example, by just looking at a 10-day weather forecast and information from previous disasters. So what this does is really helps us to forecast, to plan ahead, innovate and adopt the solutions that are necessary. And finally, I also did want to highlight our commitment through storytelling as well as our reach. You know, environmental storytelling helps to inform audiences, helps to inspire audiences with compelling stories to take action on sustainability, climate action, as well as environmental justice. Last year, Warner Media was awarded 5 Environmental Media Association awards. We have also harnessed our reach to global audiences all around the world for good. So for instance, CNN's Call to Earth, that is our commitment to reporting on the environmental challenges facing our planet together with the solutions. And really, we do hope that this will help drive awareness, action, and education around key issues that will hopefully inspire a blueprint for a more environmentally conscious life. And also, as the media industry evolves, we are working to accelerate that innovation and shift towards more sustainable production practices. So for example, by supporting innovative technologies, this includes LED set lighting, digital distribution software. We're also looking at sustainable products such as FSC certified, or that's the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC certified lumber to post-consumer recycled paper, as well as looking to reduce waste. For example, looking into donating surplus food and materials arising from productions. And finally, to conclude, I did want to underscore the importance of a facilitated and enabling regulatory environment towards harnessing technology for sustainability. I think it's important for policymakers to collaborate in best practices and standards that would allow cross-border investment as well as innovation to thrive. And here I recall in the keynote speech earlier, the term co-regulation was mentioned, right? And I think Priya talked about fostering deeper cooperation across various stakeholders. So this really includes public sector, private sector, and there is also a role for policymakers to ensure that legacy issues, so these are issues such as market access barriers, your foreign direct investment restrictions, as well as any impediments to cross-border data flows, to ensure that these issues do not stymie the use of technology to advance and to support sustainability goals. I think really to conclude, we do need to make investments into our sustainable future, placing the planet and our people at the center of our every choice. Thanks very much, and over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Esther, again for such an articulate presentation of AT&T and Warner Media's perspective on these very issues, these very important issues. And again, it's interesting you talk about co-regulation. I made exactly the same connection with some of the things Håkan Scholl was saying earlier on about the importance of industry coming together sometimes with regulators. And I think that's particularly important when we're considering challenges like climate change and sustainability, which let's face it, are quintessentially global challenges, and highlight the interdependencies, you know, across nations, across the globe, across land masses, across oceans. So I think that cooperation, which is obviously very difficult to achieve, and we know COP26, you know, had its fair share of challenges. But I think that sort of cooperation is very important, and perhaps a slightly new approach to regulation is required, which is a perfect transition to the regulator. We now have Dr. Pascal Dutroux from the communications regulator in Qatar, who's going to give his perspective as the regulator on how his country, but also his authority, is responding to the challenges that climate change and sustainability present. Pascal.
Many thanks, Thomas, and I'm really delighted to be able to contribute to this panel. Just as a few words of introduction, I would start with indeed highlighting the fact that achieving sustainability will require huge investments from all the players and stakeholders around. And indeed, tech is one of the drivers which could enable and facilitate that objective. As you all know, Qatar is a very wealthy country and one of the biggest LNG producer, which means that indeed Qatar is contributing to climate change. But Qatar is also aware of the impact on the lack of sustainability on the long run of its current economic model, which means that in practice, Qatar has been very early trying to contribute and participate to all the initiatives aiming at reducing the carbon footprint. The journey started in 1996 with the UN Convention on Climate Change, with the convention which was ratified by Qatar at the time, then reinstated in 2005 with the Kyoto Protocol in 2012 when Qatar hosted the COP18, and indeed in 2015 with the signature of the Paris Climate Agreement. And these was also reinstated in, with COP26 with a sole pledge from Qatar. And this strong commitment of Qatar was also enshrined in the Qatar Vision 2030, which was released in 2009, and to implementation and which followed. What does it mean in practice? In a nutshell, what Qatar aims at is several things. First, as you highlighted, the need for solidarity. That's why Qatar pledged to grant $100 million to small islands and developing states. Then, in terms of national targets, they can be summarized in two components. First one is reducing greenhouse gas emission by 25% by 2030, and the second is also reducing the carbon intensity of LNG facilities by 25% by the same date, which means that big change are currently occurring in Qatar in the way the main activity of the country is conducted, with a real concern about climate change. This change indeed is fueled by technology, which means that we have for quite a few years now established in Qatar research in relation to sustainability with several initiatives. And just to put a few, what is done currently by the Qatar Science and Technology Park for applied research, for Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, for Qatar Technology Innovation, etc. All these initiatives are aimed at improving sustainability through technology. This, in terms of outcome, is seen also with one of the national programs of digital transformation, TASMU, with open data initiatives to foster growth of innovative services, including sustainability, smart transport, smart health solutions, and e-education. And indeed, as more than 80% of the economy comes from oil and gas, one of the main drivers is a review of the footprint of the country in terms of oil and gas industry, and this is through the Tautin initiative. So you can see that there are quite a few things done currently in order to improve. As outcomes, you could see also that smart cities are developing, and with two main examples. One is the center of Doha, which is called Musharraf Downtown Smart City, which is the world's first sustainable regeneration project completed in 2020. It has been designed, to limit the need for personal car use, indeed, smart transport, electric transport with trams, metro hubs, etc., but also with in mind water sustainability with a reduction of 30% of the use of water, and same regarding the increased energy efficiency in the city. And Lusail City, which is a huge development in the outskirts of Doha, has the same approach with a centralized cooling system, a huge amount of economies in terms of carbon emissions. Indeed, we have also the Qatar Green Building Council, which try to promote best practices in the matter in the region, etc., etc. And for small countries, it's not comparable to Pakistan, who pledged to plant 10 million trees. In Qatar, our pledge is 1 million trees. But this is a challenge in a country which is, as you know, stone deserts mainly. But this is ongoing and quite significant. And as another example, but this will be showcased by the end of the year, as you can imagine, the FIFA World Cup 2022 is aimed at being sustainable, with a real focus on legacy. The idea was not to organize an event and then get away with it and destroying everything, but really to think about it with legacy infrastructure, taking care of the environment, etc. That's why the stadium have been built already, and they have been built in a way to consume 30% less energy and 40% less water during operation than comparable infrastructure. And likewise, post-urban use has been favored in different ways, including one stadium which is completely dismountable, and that's something else. But to touch the last point, which is tech for a greener ICT, I would focus on a few examples also, because as you can imagine, as a regulator, this is part of our mandate and our vision and mission. To make sure that ICT is greener. And so among the various initiatives conducted at governmental level and at regulatory level, the first one is to make sure that data centers and cloud services will be provided in Qatar with a zero emission target. What does it mean is that all the energy required for cooling, for whatever infrastructure required will be powered through solar farms, because there is a huge project in the country to produce more than 800 gigawatt of electricity through solar energies. And this farm will be indeed connected the various data centers. You may be aware that Qatar has signed some strategic partnership with Microsoft and Google in order to have some geo in the countries. So which means that there is a huge and very large data center infrastructure in the country. And then to give you an example of what the regulator has been doing is promoting indeed infrastructure sharing in order to reduce the footprint of infrastructures. And to give you an example, I can go through what we have done for base stations, for instance, which means that we have made sure that all the base stations in the country are identified within the GIS system of the country. That for any new approval, there is a requirement to share the same location between the service providers. We have facilitated access for service providers in terms of new sites, especially regarding 5G, which means that we have facilitated access to lampposts in the streets. We have facilitated access to the station and the substations of the electricity grids. So that at least from a purely infrastructure perspective, the footprint of the mobile network is as less as possible. And likewise, we have made certain that service providers do not use generators in cities, that they are connected directly to the grid for the same reasons. That's the kind of apartment indeed in the desert area where there is no grid by it. These were the few thoughts I wanted to share as a starting point.
No, I know. I think that's fantastic. And again, I mean, there's again some similarities with Australia in terms of obviously a country like, well, Qatar, immensely rich in fossil fuels, in oil and gas, but also immensely rich in solar energy. And so they're harnessing that to help ensure that data centers are green and are sustainable. I think is a fantastic opportunity. It's great that as a regulator you're facilitating that, and also again the importance of sharing resources, reducing emissions, making it more power efficient, again, which fits in very nicely with the discussions we've been having about 5G and also earlier with Håkon. And I think that's going to become increasingly important. Last but by no means least, I'd like to turn to Uni. Now, of course, Uni is slightly different here. She's not representing a big corporate. She's not representing a regulator. She's representing a bank that holds the purse strings. And I think, obviously, in addition to cooperation, I think we're all very aware that sustainability also requires investment, and fighting climate change, although the goal itself is very important, may also require investment. And I'd like to, I'd very much like to now hear from Uni, who I know is going to talk about, well, she's going to talk about a few things, but I think a very important study that the ADB has just published around the use of tech to support sustainability, also I think about the impacts on the developing world, also particularly in light of the pandemic. We've heard now from some from quite a wealthy country, but I think we're also aware that there are many countries in Asia that are very much developing countries and that are not so wealthy. And so obviously the Asian Development Bank is very keen to ensure too that sustainability can be pursued there. So without paraphrasing anymore, over to you, Uni.
Thanks, Thomas. And you can paraphrase all day long. I think when you're actually making it sound a lot better than when it comes to my own. But first of all, I'd like to thank IIC for extending invitation to ADB to share stage with industry experts, the regulator, and of course an important partner in the legal space, such as Bird and Bird. As Thomas mentioned, and I'd like to talk from the perspective of a regional development bank, that is ADB. And for those of you who are not familiar, Thomas described us as holding a purse string, and we're just one of the many players in terms of development and finance partners to developing countries. And we're founded in 1966, and it's a multilateral bank with membership of 68 countries, out of which 40 are borrowing members. And our objective is to achieve sustainable, resilient, and inclusive Asia Pacific with the outsized focus on eradicating poverty. And as such, our perspective obviously would like to represent the views as well as the priorities of the developing members. And my for the next 10 minutes, hopefully shorter, I'd like to talk about three things. One is ADB's elevated focus on climate change. Second, as Thomas mentioned, some highlights from the recently published report on digital technologies and their applications for climate response, environmental sustainability, and disaster resilience. And just some thoughts on the priorities for ADB, as well as for developing member governments to consider. Right. So first on ADB, ADB, I mentioned elevated focus because as a development bank, climate change has always been a key priority, and it's not unique to ADB. It's true for World Bank, Inter-American banks, as well as some of the governments. But ADB is quite unique in that from early on, in fact, in 2015, made a commitment to double our climate financing and came up with a strategic action framework to do so. And in the recently concluded COP26, ADB was one of the only multilateral development banks to make a concrete commitment to provide 100 billion financing from 2019 to 2030. And just for scale, ADB's operations for 2020 amounted to 32 billion. So what it means for us is that we have to mainstream climate change adaptation across all our operations, all our lending, as well as all our knowledge and technical assistance activities. And that's just the scale, as well as the pressure as someone who works at ADB in terms of promoting climate change adaptation in our member countries. And moving on to the report. So alongside the climate change, digitalization, as a lot of panelists mentioned in previous sessions, is a big trend. And ADB is actually slightly late to the game compared to our climate change focus. I work for a team called Digital Technology for Development Unit. And compared to our other sectors, transport, energy, water, for example, we're a very small team, but with an outsized ambition to mainstream digital technologies in all our operations. So combining the cutting, cross-cutting themes of climate change adaptation across all adaptation and digital technologies, there's a big task ahead of us, and then the report is sort of a first step in framing how ADB will approach the use of digital technologies in climate change adaptations. And by all means, it's an important first step, but I believe there'll be more knowledge products to come from ADB in this field. So just quickly on the report, it's part of ADB's knowledge initiative. We provide loans and technical assistance, but more and more we acknowledge the importance of building awareness, capacity, as well as knowledge in our stakeholders in developing member countries. And such report is a good starting point for us to initiate a dialogue and provide deeper and more customized support to our developing member countries. So as such, the report is fairly as a fairly high level, but touches upon a few things and highlights how ADB frames digital technologies in the climate change space. So first of all, digital technologies is a very expansionary field. And in the report, the way we approached it is to categorize digital technologies into 3 different stages in terms of the maturity, as well as level of adaptation, and perhaps the impact that digital technologies would have as climate solutions. So in stage 1, these include technologies that have been available for decades, such as the internet, mobile, as well as satellite applications. So here I'm referring to Earth observations, remote sensing, and not necessarily satellite, but GIS technologies as well. And these are sort of the fundamental layers of digital technologies that would enable use of digital technologies in the climate change adaptations. Stage 2 include technologies that would enable more instant and rapid collaborations and communications, as well as augment the processing power of different solutions. So these include apps, social media, cloud computing, again, technologies that have been available for a few years and are widely adopted. It's the technologies in stage 3 that have perhaps the most impact and potential to really magnify and augment our developing members' capacity to not only respond to disasters that are at hand, but a long-term climate resilience in the countries. And here we're talking about AI, machine learning, and of course supported by data from IoT, big data analytics, and it's not mentioned in the report, but in a strict sense, without 5G, I don't think stage 3 technology adaptation will be meaningful in my point of view. Don't want to get into the details, but then the report also warns about technology idolatry. We often talk about digital technologies, and those who've been in the industry would be the first one to say these are not the silver bullets. And what we try to do in the report is to provide a sequencing as well as a systematic approach on how to evaluate digital technologies by calculating the marginal cost as well as marginal abatement effects of these technologies have for climate change, and also sort of a decision tree on how to evaluate the impact it has, as well as a weighing scale to assess the maturity as well as the impact different technologies would have. And lastly, these knowledge on these frameworks on stage 1 to 3, or how to adopt technologies at an institutional level is great, but we all know there has to be an enabling environment and more policy level support to operationalize this knowledge into actions. So the report concludes with some action points as well as recommendations, and this includes efforts to sort of increase absorptive power and the use of digital technologies, as well as recommendations on how to integrate digital technologies on nationally determined contributions, specifically on how to evaluate and monitor each country's carbon emission, for example, and ways to promote private and public partnerships. And as Priya mentioned, a lot of countries are looking at green recovery at the tail end of pandemic, and investment into digital communications, for example, as well as capacity is also recommended in the report as an opportunity to not just recover from the pandemic, but to build long-term resilience. So that concludes my intervention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on the report or what ADB does in this space in general.
No, terrific, Yeni. Thank you very much. And I think it's very clear, just from what you said, that this is a very thoughtful and creative contribution to the debate about the potential for technology and digitalization to help combat the challenges we face with climate change and also sustainability. And again, just echoing some of the things we've talked about earlier. I mean, again, going back to the keynote, Håkon was talking about partnership and the importance of scale in dealing with some of the issues they're facing. Again, you're talking about public and private partnerships here as being something that's also of value. Again, that brings in also a bit the themes about co-regulation and perhaps the need to approach regulation somewhat differently when we're dealing with sustainability and climate change, perhaps not so prescriptively, but to some extent in a bit of a trial and error way, although backed up by, as you say, and you were slightly shy about it, but I think it's very important to have rigorous cost-benefit analysis to look at the marginal cost and the marginal benefit of lots of these things. And again, just talking a bit about technology idolatry. Again, it goes back to the discussion earlier, the importance of education in ensuring that the benefits of digitalization aren't lost, and in fact that some of the risks, like we've talked about scams, we've talked about all of this massive influx of data onto people's awareness and eyeballs, that can also have challenges. So education and awareness are very important. I've got a quick question. Going back to the analogy of the purse strings, which I know is slightly unfair, but I mean, in terms of this area, and you've talked very eloquently about the report, but what's the ideal project for you to as a bank to start thinking about in some of the, particularly in developing countries? What does sort of an ideal project look like that would really be something that would help use digitalization and digital technologies to help face the challenges posed by climate change?
Thanks, Thomas. ADB does a lot of projects across different sectors. So I'll be a bit selfish and talk about some of the work that our team is doing and related to digital connectivity. As mentioned, digital connectivity, be it wireless or fixed, is really the fundamental layer that would enable development members to use smart climate solutions in the future. And if you look at our development members, mobile has connected a lot of people, but when it comes to fiber, for example, or use of IoT in critical sectors such as transport, water, or energy, is still at a very nascent stage. So one of the things that our team is trying to do is to enable this fundamental layer by focusing on investment and technical assistance in building and boosting this connectivity in our transport projects, or in our water projects or energy projects. And the solutions may seem different depending on the projects, but it's providing the technical assistance or loans, or even providing loans to private sector companies, or co-financing these with different banks or investors and private sector players to enable this connectivity layer. But going to the other extreme of very climate or disaster focused projects, our team is also working with different governments to boost the use of Earth observation capability for monitoring, forecasting, and predicting different disaster response. And this includes rehabilitation and providing long-term resilience to Indonesia, for example, that was affected by tsunami a few years ago, and building their national spatial capability to monitor and forecast and identify risk-prone areas in advance, and augmenting the structural and infrastructural capabilities, such as strengthening the critical infrastructure such as roads, buildings, to make sure that these countries can withstand future disasters.
Thank you. That's fantastic and very interesting projects. Now a question for Pascal, and I'll turn to one. I had one for you, but I'll turn to one we got from the audience. Someone has just asked about whether you're employing any consumer-facing initiatives to support sustainability in Qatar, for instance, disseminating information about the usage of ICT and so on. Pascal?
Sorry, I forgot I was mute. in practice, I would say this is the main challenge ultimately, because you can always have some very strong political directions as long as you do not get the population on board, as it's very difficult to really drive the change. So transformation of our ways are key in order to achieve the objectives. So from a practical perspective, yes, there are some actions conducted with a specific entity within the Ministry of ICT, or CIT, I'm sorry, which is in charge of socializing these issues and making sure that the targets are achieved and understood by the population. One of the biggest issues for Qatar is that 90% of the population is expats and moving on a regular basis. Every year you have about 30% of the population which changes, which means that educating people, driving change is a really long-term issue, and you cannot just do it because you have decided that one day it will be done.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I'm conscious now. Moving to Esther and Priya, because I think we've got about a bit over 5 minutes left before we wrap up. And I think you've both talked about this to some extent. But what role do you think operators have in encouraging their suppliers and their vendors to pursue sustainability? Either Esther or Priya, whoever would like to answer that one first.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Esther.
Oh. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Priya. I think both of us are super excited to answer this question, because there is indeed that critical role, right, that we as operators play. I think just very quickly, two main thoughts. One is we do need to leverage scale to address this issue of climate change and to pursue sustainability. And the second thought I wanted to leave the audience with is to leverage what I call a many hands approach. I think several of the panelists have spoken about that. Pascal, you referred it to as solidarity towards a common goal. Uni, you talked about public-private partnerships. But the fact of the matter is no one can go about it alone to address climate change. We do need stakeholders across our planets. We do need stakeholders across our communities. And that takes many hands towards the same goal. And I think that's really the thinking behind the Connected Climate Initiative that AT&T had launched in August last year. This is a consortium of leading tech companies, our business customers, universities, as well as environmental nonprofits. So certainly important role, critical role for operators to play.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you very much. Priya, you have the last word. You can answer my question as Esther did, or you can just, if you like, make an observation generally based on what you've heard from all of our wonderful panelists this evening.
No, absolutely. Maybe going back to the question, because I think the role that operators play in promoting that suppliers can pursue sustainability is really important. As you know, as global operators, we spend billions on external suppliers, and they range from OEMs to smaller providers of equipment as well. And let me share just one quick example of how we promote our vendors to pursue sustainability. First and foremost, we expect our suppliers to comply with the code of conduct, which means not only acting with integrity, but also complying with the environmental laws. And the other big initiative, which is really at an industry level, is a joint audit cooperation. So Verizon is a member of this association of telecom operators that are really collaborating. They are they're auditing the common vendors and looking for opportunities to kind of improve supplier responsibility. And these efforts are not only what our suppliers are pledging, but also surveying their on-site performance. So Verizon has joined this audit cooperation in 2013 and as the first US-based members. And other telcos who are members include AT&T, Orange, KPN, Telefonica, Telenor, Vodafone, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the initiatives that telcos have taken to promote the vendors to pursue a more sustainable path as it relates to the supply chain as well. So with that, let me hand it back to you, Thomas.
Well, thank you. And I think that's that sense of cooperation and optimism, which I think shines through a lot of the comments we've heard from all of the comments we've heard from the panelists this evening, and obviously also from Håkon in the keynote. I think it's a great note to end on. So I would like to personally thank each of you, you, Priya, Esther, Pascal, and Uni for your thoughtful and engaging and engaged contributions. It's been a real pleasure for me to listen to you all, and I'd also like to thank Lynn for putting the program again together. And with that, thank you all very much. And from me, good night. For some of you, good afternoon or good morning.
Cool.
Thank you ever so much, Thomas and panelists, for an excellent final session of the day. Really appreciate your time and just so good. So thank you. So as I bring day one to a close, I would like to thank all of our speakers and moderators for a first-rate TMF today. Now, the IIC's Asia TMF continues tomorrow at 0600 hours GMT, that's to be clear. Now, the panels will focus on the metaverse and digital assets, the complexities of online content regulation, connectivity and video streaming, and support for local and regional content. We also have our second keynote speaker, which is Scott Beaumont, President Asia Pacific Google, and he's in conversation with Chris Chapman, President of the IIC. So another packed session, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow and welcoming you back. So thank you. Good afternoon.